Here's a question I want you to think about as we begin. How do you know what you know? Not what you believe, not what you hope, not what someone told you, but what you actually know with confidence. How do you distinguish between genuine knowledge and mere opinion, between reliable information and clever deception? This question, this fundamental human concern with the nature and limits of knowledge, is what drove one of the most brilliant minds in ancient India to develop what would become one of the world's most sophisticated systems of logic and epistemology. Welcome to our exploration of Gautama, also known as Akṣapāda Gautama, the founder of the Nyaya school of Indian philosophy. What Gautama created wasn't just another philosophical system, it was India's science of reasoning itself, a comprehensive framework for thinking clearly, arguing rigorously, and distinguishing truth from error. Let's establish who we're talking about. Gautama lived sometime between the 2nd century BCE and the 2nd century CE. Scholars debate the exact dates, which is common with ancient Indian philosophers. But what's not debatable is his impact. Gautama founded Nyaya, one of the 6 orthodox schools of Hindu philosophy, the ones that accept the authority of the Vedas. But here's what makes Gautama special. While other schools focused primarily on metaphysics, theology, or ritual interpretation, Gautama said, "Hold on. Before we can discuss ultimate reality or the nature of the divine, we need to establish how we know anything at all." This was revolutionary. Gautama took the scattered methods of argumentation that existed in his time, the techniques used by philosophers, priests, and debaters, and systematized them into a coherent, rigorous discipline. He transformed logic and epistemology from informal practices into central, respectable fields of philosophical inquiry. Think about what this means. Gautama wasn't just creating another theory about reality. He was creating the tools for evaluating all theories about reality. He was building the foundation upon which all other philosophical investigation would rest. His major achievement was establishing that systematic logical analysis wasn't just useful for winning debates. It was essential for the pursuit of truth itself. And more than that, he argued that this pursuit of truth through rigorous reasoning was actually a path to liberation, to freedom from suffering. Knowledge wasn't just intellectually satisfying, it was spiritually transformative. So what exactly did Gautama create? What is this Nyaya system that would influence Indian philosophy for the next 2,000 years? The word Nyaya literally means method or rule, and that tells you something important right away. This isn't Gautama's philosophy in the sense of, here's what I believe about reality. It's here's the method for figuring out what's true about reality. Nyaya represents 3 interconnected things. First, it's a systematic approach to logical reasoning and debate. Gautama wanted to establish clear rules for how philosophical arguments should be constructed, evaluated, and defended. No more rhetorical tricks, no more appeals to emotion, just rigorous, transparent reasoning. Second, Nyaya is an epistemological framework for determining valid knowledge. It asks, what are the legitimate sources of knowledge? How do we distinguish between beliefs that are justified and beliefs that aren't? When can we say we genuinely know something rather than just guessing or hoping? Third, Nyaya is a methodology for philosophical investigation itself. It provides tools not just for thinking about specific questions, but for approaching any philosophical question systematically. The core mission of Nyaya is to establish the Pramāṇas, the valid means of acquiring knowledge, and to show how these can be used to investigate reality, refute error, and ultimately achieve liberation from suffering. Here's what's remarkable. Gautama wasn't just interested in abstract theory. He believed that confused thinking, false beliefs, and logical errors were the root cause of human suffering. If you could learn to think clearly, to reason rigorously, to distinguish truth from falsehood, you could free yourself from the cycle of rebirth and suffering. Logic wasn't just academic, it was soteriological, it was about salvation. Gautama's masterwork is the Nyāya Sūtras, written in the compressed aphoristic style that was standard for Indian philosophical texts. The word sutra literally means thread. These are philosophical threads that weave together into a comprehensive system. The text is organized into 5 books, each containing 2 chapters, for a total of approximately 528 individual sutras. Each sutra is incredibly dense, sometimes just a few words in Sanskrit, requiring extensive commentary to unpack its full meaning. Let me walk you through what each book covers, because the structure itself reveals Gautama's pedagogical genius. Book 1 lays the foundation by introducing the 16 categories that structure all Nyaya investigation. These aren't random. They're the fundamental concepts you need to understand before you can do philosophy properly. We'll explore these in detail shortly. Book 2 gets into the practical work of philosophical inquiry. How does doubt arise? What's the purpose of investigation? How do we use examples effectively in arguments? This is where theory meets practice. Book 3 examines what we might call the subjects of knowledge: the self, the body, the sense organs, and the objects they perceive. This is Nyaya's foray into metaphysics and philosophy of mind. Book 4, and this is crucial, addresses fallacies in reasoning and the proper conduct of debate. Gautama knew that identifying bad arguments is just as important as constructing good ones. He systematically cataloged the ways reasoning can go wrong. Book 5 covers sophisticated refutations and advanced debate techniques. By the time you reach this book, you're learning not just how to think clearly yourself, but how to identify and respond to sophisticated errors in others' thinking. The foundation of this entire system rests on Gautama's epistemology, his theory of how we acquire valid knowledge. Let's examine the Four Pramāṇas. Here's where Gautama makes his most fundamental contribution to Indian philosophy. He identifies exactly 4, not 3, not 5, but 4, valid means of acquiring knowledge. These are the Pramāṇas, and everything else in Nyaya builds on this foundation. Why does this matter so much? Because different philosophical schools in India disagreed radically about this question. Some Buddhists accepted only 2 Pramāṇas. Some Hindu schools accepted 6. The Carvaka materialists accepted only 1. This wasn't just an academic debate. Your entire epistemology, your entire theory of what you can know and how you can know it, depends on which Pramāṇas you accept. Gautama's 4 are pratyaksa, perception, anumana inference, upamana comparison, and shabda testimony. Let's understand each one. First, pratyaksa, perception. This is direct sensory experience, the most immediate form of knowledge. When your eyes make contact with a visible object, when your ears receive sound, when your skin feels texture, that's pratyaksa. It's the foundation of all other knowledge because everything else ultimately traces back to what someone, somewhere, has directly perceived. Second, anumana, inference. This is logical reasoning that extends your knowledge beyond what you directly perceive. You see smoke, you infer fire. You observe certain symptoms, you infer a disease. Inference is what allows human knowledge to grow beyond the immediate present. Third, upamana, comparison or analogy. This is knowledge acquired through recognizing similarity between something unknown and something you already know. If someone tells you a gavaya is like a cow, and you later encounter an animal that resembles a cow in certain ways, you can know that's a gavaya through comparison. Fourth, shabda, testimony or verbal authority. This is knowledge from reliable sources, including both expert testimony and Vedic revelation. Most of what any of us knows about the world comes not from personal experience, but from what trustworthy people have told us. Notice what Gautama is doing here. He's acknowledging that knowledge comes from multiple sources, each legitimate in its own domain. You can't reduce everything to perception alone, and you can't reduce everything to inference alone. Human knowledge is richer and more complex than that. Let's dig deeper into perception, because it's the foundation of the entire epistemological structure. Pratyaksa arises from direct contact between a sense organ and its corresponding object. Your eyes and visible forms, your ears and sounds, your skin and textures, your tongue and tastes, your nose and smells. This contact produces immediate awareness. You see the smoke, you hear the thunder, you feel the heat. Nyaya distinguishes between 2 levels of perception, and this distinction is philosophically important. First, there's nirvikalpaka, indeterminate perception. This is the bare, preconceptual awareness of something before you've categorized it or recognized what it is. It's the raw sensory data. Then there's savikalpaka, determinate perception. This is when you recognize qualities and categories. That's smoke. That's the color blue. That's a cow. This is what we ordinarily mean when we say we perceive something. Both are valid forms of pratyaksa, but they operate at different levels of cognitive processing. The indeterminate perception gives you the raw material. The determinate perception gives you usable knowledge. Here's why this matters. Perception is valid when your sense organs are functioning properly and conditions are right. If you have an eye disease, if the lighting is poor, if you're too far away, the perceptual contact might be faulty. Gautama isn't naive about this. He knows perception can mislead. But when conditions are proper, perception gives you direct, immediate, reliable knowledge of the world. The classic example Gautama uses throughout the Nyaya Sūtras, seeing smoke rising from a distant hill. You directly perceive the smoke. That perception is the foundation for what comes next. Inference about fire. But perception alone only gets you so far. You can only perceive what's present to your senses right now. To extend knowledge beyond the immediate present, you need inference. And this is where Nyaya's logical genius truly shines. Of the four Pramāṇas, Anumana received by far the most elaborate treatment in Gautama's work, and it's here that his logical brilliance is most evident. Inference is what allows you to know things you cannot directly perceive by reasoning from what you have observed. Think about what inference does. You're standing at the base of a mountain. You can't see the summit, but you see smoke rising from it. You can't perceive the fire directly, but through inference you can know with confidence that there's fire up there. You've extended your knowledge beyond your immediate perceptual field through logical reasoning. The engine of inference is what Nyaya calls vyapti, invariable concomitance. This is a universal relationship between two things that you've established through repeated observation. Wherever there is smoke, there is fire, without exception. You've never observed smoke without fire, and you've observed countless instances of the smoke-fire relationship. This establishes vyapti. Once you've established vyapti, you can use it to reason about new cases. You observe smoke in a new location, and the vyapti relationship licenses you to conclude there must be fire there too, even though you can't see it. This might sound simple, but Gautama's analysis of inference is incredibly sophisticated. He distinguishes between different types of inference. Inference for oneself versus inference for others. Inference from cause to effect versus effect to cause. Inference from commonly observed connections versus rarely observed ones. Later, Nyaya thinkers would spend centuries refining this theory, eventually developing what's called Navya Nyaya, new logic, which is recognized as one of the most technically sophisticated logical systems in world history, comparable to modern symbolic logic in its precision. Here's where Nyaya does something unique in the history of logic. While Western logic uses a three-part syllogism, major premise, minor premise, conclusion, Nyaya uses a five-part structure called Pañcāvayava. And this isn't just different for the sake of being different. It's pedagogically and logically superior in important ways. Let me walk you through the classic example, proving there's fire on the hill. First, pratiñña, the proposition. The hill has fire. This is your claim, what you're trying to establish. It's stated clearly up front so everyone knows what's being argued. Second, hetu, the reason. Because it has smoke. This is your evidence, the observable fact that supports your claim. Third, udaharana, the example with universal rule. Wherever there is smoke, there is fire, as in a kitchen. This is crucial. You're not just asserting the universal relationship, you're providing a familiar instance that everyone can verify. The kitchen example grounds the abstract principle in concrete experience. Fourth, upanaya, the application. This hill has smoke. You're explicitly connecting the universal rule to the specific case at hand. You're saying, the condition mentioned in the universal rule is present here. Fifth, nigamana, the conclusion. Therefore, this hill has fire. You've completed the logical movement from evidence through universal principle to conclusion. Now why 5 parts instead of 3? Because Nyaya is designed not just for formal validity, but for pedagogical clarity and persuasive power. Each step makes the reasoning transparent. There's no hidden logical move, no implicit assumption. Everything is laid out explicitly. The Western syllogism might be more economical, but the Nyaya inference is more complete. It shows not just that the conclusion follows, but why it follows, how it follows, and provides a concrete example that anyone can verify. This 5-member structure became the standard form of philosophical argumentation throughout Indian philosophy. Even schools that disagreed with Nyaya on metaphysics or epistemology adopted this inferential framework. Transition. We've covered 2 of the 4 Pramāṇas in depth. Let's complete the epistemological picture with comparison and testimony, then explore the broader framework Gautama established. The 3rd Pramāṇa is upamana, comparison or analogy. This one is subtle, and some philosophical schools rejected it as a separate pramāṇa, arguing it could be reduced to inference or perception. But Gautama insisted it was distinct, and his reasoning is interesting. Here's the classic example. You've never seen a gavaya, a wild ox. Someone tells you, a gavaya resembles a domestic cow. Later you're walking in the forest and you encounter an animal. You recognize the similarity to a cow, and through that recognition of similarity, you know, This is a Gavaya. Now you might think this is just inference. Things that resemble cows in these ways are Gavayas. This resembles a cow. Therefore this is a Gavaya. But Gautama argues there's something distinct happening here. The knowledge arises not from a formal inference but from the immediate recognition of similarity coupled with the previous verbal instruction. It's a unique cognitive process that bridges the familiar and the unfamiliar. Upamana is important because it explains how we extend our conceptual vocabulary, how we learn new categories through comparison with known ones. It's the basis of analogical reasoning, which is fundamental to human learning. The fourth pramāṇa is shabda, testimony or verbal authority. This is knowledge derived from the words of a reliable speaker, someone who has direct knowledge, intends to communicate truthfully, and has the linguistic ability to express themselves accurately. Nyaya recognizes both human testimony and Vedic revelation under this category. Most of what any individual knows about the world comes not from personal perception or inference, but from trustworthy sources. You know about historical events, distant places, scientific facts, all through Shabda. The key philosophical question is, what makes a source reliable? Nyaya says the speaker must be an apta, someone with direct knowledge of what they're reporting, free from deception and capable of accurate expression. When these conditions are met, their testimony generates valid knowledge. This is philosophically significant because it acknowledges that knowledge is fundamentally social. We don't each have to personally verify everything. We can legitimately rely on expert testimony, on established authorities, on the accumulated wisdom of tradition, as long as we're careful about which sources we trust. Let me focus on categories 10 through 12, the three types of philosophical discussion, because this reveals something important about Gautama's philosophical ethics. Vada is genuine debate, truth-seeking dialogue. Both parties are sincerely committed to discovering what's true. They use only valid reasoning, accepted pramāṇas, and honest argumentation. The goal isn't to win, but to understand. Neither party has ego invested in their position. If you're shown to be wrong, you're grateful because you've learned something. This is the ideal form of philosophical discourse in Nyaya. It's what philosophy should be. Collaborative investigation of truth, not competitive performance. Jalpa is wrangling, debate aimed primarily at victory. Participants might deploy sophistical arguments, equivocation, rhetorical tricks to defeat their opponent. This was common in the public philosophical contests of classical India, where philosophers would compete for patronage and prestige. Gautama acknowledges Jalpa as a real phenomenon, but he's clear that it's morally inferior to Vada. It might be useful for testing your argumentative skills, but it's not genuine philosophy. The problem is that in Jalpa, you're more concerned with appearing right than being right. Vitanda is pure destructive criticism. The Vitanda disputant aims only to refute the opponent's position without ever establishing any positive view of their own. They're intellectual vandals. They can tear things down, but never build anything. Gautama considers this the least valuable form of discourse. It might be useful for identifying weaknesses in a theory, but it's philosophically empty on its own. Pure negation without any constructive alternative is sterile. What I find fascinating here is that Gautama isn't just teaching logic, he's teaching philosophical virtue. He's saying that how you argue matters, that intellectual honesty and truth-seeking are moral goods, that philosophy is fundamentally an ethical practice. Part of philosophical virtue is recognizing and avoiding errors in reasoning. Let's look at Gautama's systematic analysis of logical fallacies. One of Gautama's most enduring contributions is his careful taxonomy of hetvabhasas, pseudo-reasons, apparent reasons that seem to support a conclusion but actually undermine valid inference. This is category 13 of the 16, but it deserves special attention because recognizing fallacies is just as important as constructing good arguments. Gautama identifies 5 major types of fallacious reasoning, and each one reveals a different way that inference can go wrong. First, savyabhikara, the irregular or inconclusive reason. This is when the reason applies equally to contradictory conclusions, making it useless as evidence. For example, sound is eternal because it is audible. But wait, some audible things are eternal and some aren't. The property of being audible doesn't reliably indicate eternality. The middle term wanders across incompatible cases, so it proves nothing. Second, viruddha, the contradictory reason. This is when the reason actually proves the opposite of what you're trying to establish. The argument turns against itself. For example, sound is eternal because it is produced. But being produced means having a beginning, which contradicts eternality. You've just disproved your own conclusion. Third, prakarana sama, equal to the question or begging the question. This is when the reason is as doubtful as the conclusion it's meant to prove. You're trying to establish X by appealing to Y, but Y is just as uncertain as X. You haven't actually provided support, you've just restated the problem. Fourth, sadhyasama, the unproved reason. The reason itself is unestablished, so it can't provide epistemic support for the conclusion. You're building on sand. Before you can use this as a reason, you'd need to establish it independently. Fifth, kalatita, the mistimed reason. This is when the reason is applied at the wrong time, after conditions have changed, making the inference inapplicable to the present case. The relationship that held before doesn't hold now. What's brilliant about this taxonomy is that it's not just a list of errors. It's a diagnostic tool. When you encounter an argument that seems fishy, but you can't quite put your finger on why, these categories help you identify exactly what's gone wrong. We've focused heavily on epistemology and logic, but Gautama didn't limit himself to these domains. Nyaya offers a complete metaphysical picture of reality, organized around 7 fundamental categories of existence. First, dravya, substance. These are the basic entities that exist independently: earth, water, fire, air, ether space, time, direction, self-atman, and mind manas. These 9 substances are the fundamental constituents of reality. Second, guna, quality. These are properties that inhere in substances but don't exist independently. Nyaya recognizes 24 qualities: color, taste, smell, touch, number, magnitude, separateness, conjunction, disjunction, priority, posteriority, understanding, pleasure, pain, desire, aversion, effort, heaviness, fluidity, viscidity, sound, merit, and demerit. Third, karma, action or motion. There are 5 types: upward, downward, contraction, expansion, and locomotion. Actions are what substances do. Fourth, samanya, generality or universal. This is what multiple things have in common: cowness that all cows share, redness that all red things share. Nyaya is a realist about universals. They're not just mental constructs, they're real features of the world. Fifth, vishesa, particularity. These are the ultimate individuating features that make each eternal substance numerically distinct from every other. Even if 2 atoms were qualitatively identical, vishesa is what makes them 2 atoms rather than 1. Sixth, samavaya, inherence. This is the inseparable connection between things, like the relationship between a quality and the substance it inheres in, or between a whole and its parts. It's a unique type of relationship that can't be reduced to conjunction or contact. Seventh, abhava, non-existence or absence. Nyaya recognizes 4 types of absence: prior non-existence, before something comes into being; posterior non-existence, after something ceases; absolute non-existence, things that never exist; and mutual non-existence, the difference between things. What's philosophically significant here is that Nyaya takes absence seriously as a real category. The absence of something isn't just nothing. It's a real feature of the world that can be perceived and known. This metaphysical framework supports Nyaya's distinctive theory of causation and its ultimate soteriological goal: liberation through knowledge. Nyaya's theory of causation puts it in direct opposition to another major Indian school, Samkhya. This is one of the fundamental metaphysical debates in Indian philosophy, and understanding it reveals what's at stake in these seemingly abstract discussions. Nyaya holds what's called Asatkaryavada, the view that the effect does not pre-exist in the cause. When a potter makes a pot from clay, the pot is genuinely new. It has properties that the clay alone didn't possess: the specific shape, the capacity to hold water, the functional unity. The pot isn't just a transformation of something already present in the clay, it's an ontological addition to the world. This contrasts sharply with Samkhya's Satkaryavada, the view that the effect does pre-exist in the cause, just in an unmanifest form. For Samkhya, the pot was already potentially present in the clay, and production is merely the manifestation of what was latent. Why does this matter? Because it has implications for everything from cosmology to soteriology. If effects pre-exist in causes, then everything that will ever exist already exists in some form in the primordial cause. If effects don't pre-exist, then causation involves genuine novelty, real emergence of new properties. Gautama distinguishes 3 types of causes, and this tripartite analysis became standard in Indian philosophy. Samavaya karana, the inherent or material cause. These are the threads that constitute the cloth, the clay that constitutes the pot. The effect inheres in this cause through samavaya, asamavayi karana, the non-inherent cause. This is something like the color of the threads, which determines the color of the cloth. It's a quality of the material cause that affects the effect. Nimitta karana, the efficient cause. This is the weaver whose skill and action brings the cloth into being, the potter who shapes the clay. It's the agent or force that produces the effect. This tripartite analysis allows for sophisticated causal explanations. To fully explain why something exists, you need to account for all three types of causes. Here's something crucial to understand. Nyaya isn't just an academic exercise in logic and epistemology. Its deepest purpose is soteriological, the attainment of Mokṣa, liberation from the cycle of birth, death, and suffering. According to Nyaya, suffering arises from mithyajnana, false belief about the nature of the self and the world. We suffer because we're confused, because we misidentify ourselves with the body, because we're attached to impermanent things, because we don't understand the true nature of reality. The path to liberation, then, is through knowledge, specifically through the systematic elimination of false beliefs and their replacement with true knowledge acquired through valid pramāṇas. Here's the progression. You begin by studying the means of valid knowledge: perception, inference, comparison, testimony. You learn to distinguish genuine knowledge from mere opinion. You understand the true nature of the self as distinct from the body, mind, and sense organs. Through sustained philosophical inquiry, you remove false beliefs and attachments. You see through the illusions that bind you to the cycle of rebirth. When false knowledge is completely eliminated and replaced with perfect knowledge, the causes of rebirth are removed. Liberation, for Nyaya, is the complete cessation of pain. And here's where Nyaya takes an austere position that might surprise you. Mokṣa isn't a state of positive bliss or happiness. It's the absence of all experience, including pleasure, because all experience implies the potential for suffering. The liberated self is pure consciousness, free from all qualities, free from all experience. It's not enjoying eternal bliss. It's beyond both pleasure and pain, in a state of complete peace through the absence of all that could cause suffering. This might seem bleak to Western ears, but for Nyaya, it's the only genuine solution to the problem of suffering. As long as you're experiencing anything, even pleasure, you're vulnerable to suffering. True liberation is transcendence of all experience. This soteriological goal is grounded in Nyaya's broader philosophical commitments, its epistemological realism, its atomism, and its later development of theism. Let me clarify three core philosophical commitments that define Nyaya's position in the broader landscape of Indian philosophy. First, epistemological realism. Nyaya maintains that the external world exists independently of any perceiver. Objects possess real, mind-independent properties. When you perceive a tree, the tree is really there, with real properties, whether you're perceiving it or not. This might seem obvious, but it was hotly contested in Indian philosophy. Certain Buddhist idealist schools argued that reality is fundamentally mental, that what we call external objects are actually constructions of consciousness. The Buddhist philosopher Vasubandhu famously argued that there are no external objects at all. Everything is just consciousness appearing to itself in various forms. Nyaya rejected this emphatically. Knowledge is valid precisely because it corresponds to objective reality. When your perception is veridical, it's because there really is an object out there with the properties you're perceiving. Epistemology requires metaphysical realism. Second, atomism. Material reality is composed of eternal indivisible atoms, Pramāṇas, of four types: earth, water, fire, and air. These atoms are the ultimate constituents of the physical world. They're eternal, partless, and imperceptible individually, but they combine under causal influence to produce the perceptible macroscopic objects of everyday experience. This atomic theory parallels developments in Greek philosophy. Democritus and Leucippus proposed similar views, but it developed independently in India. Nyaya's atomism provided a materialist foundation for its metaphysics while still allowing for non-material substances like the self and mind. Third, theism. Now this is interesting because theism isn't prominent in the earliest Nyaya Sūtras, but later Nyaya thinkers, particularly in the medieval period, developed sophisticated arguments for the existence of God, Shvara, as the efficient cause of the universe. These arguments parallel Western cosmological and teleological arguments. The universe shows order and design. Atoms don't organize themselves into complex structures spontaneously. Therefore, there must be an intelligent cause, God, who arranges atoms according to the karmic merits and demerits of souls. This theistic turn was partly a response to Buddhist criticisms and partly a development of implications already present in Nyaya metaphysics. By the medieval period, Nyaya Vaishesika theism became one of the most philosophically sophisticated forms of Hindu theology. The relationship between Nyaya and Buddhist logic was one of the most productive philosophical rivalries in human history. Each tradition sharpened itself against the other over centuries, producing increasingly refined theories of knowledge and inference. Let me highlight the key differences. Inference structure. Nyaya uses the five-member inference we discussed. Buddhist logicians, particularly Dignaga in the 5th to 6th century CE, reformed Buddhist logic to use a three-member structure more similar to Aristotelian syllogism. They argued the five members contained redundancy. Nyaya responded that the five members made the reasoning more transparent and pedagogically superior. Metaphysics. Nyaya is robustly realist. The external world is real. Objects have stable properties. Buddhist positions varied, but many schools were idealist or phenomenalist, arguing that what we call external objects are either mental constructions or momentary phenomena without stable essence. The self. This is perhaps the most fundamental disagreement. Nyaya affirms the existence of a permanent, eternal Atman, a substantial self that persists through time and transmigrates from life to life. Buddhism's Anatman doctrine denies this. The self is a convenient fiction, a conceptual construct imposed on a stream of momentary mental events. There is no permanent self, just the illusion of one. Vedic authority. Nyaya accepts the Vedas as a valid source of knowledge under Shabda. The Vedas are considered authorless, eternal, and infallible. Buddhism rejected Vedic authority entirely, refusing to appeal to scripture as a philosophical foundation. Ultimate goal. Both traditions seek liberation, but they conceive it differently. Nyaya's Mokṣa is liberation through valid knowledge of reality. Buddhist nirvana is liberation through insight into the emptiness and impermanence of all phenomena, including the self. Theory of universals. Nyaya is a realist about universals. Samanya really exists. Cowness is a real property shared by all cows, not just a mental abstraction. Most Buddhist schools are nominalists. Universals are conceptual fictions we impose on reality for practical purposes. This wasn't just abstract theorizing. Buddhist and Nyaya philosophers engaged in actual debates, wrote refutations of each other's positions, and developed increasingly sophisticated responses to each other's arguments. The result was that both traditions became sharper, more rigorous, more philosophically sophisticated. This intellectual rivalry helped establish Nyaya's enduring influence on Indian philosophy and, eventually, on global philosophical discourse. Gautama's impact on Indian philosophy cannot be overstated. By establishing logic and epistemology as central, respectable disciplines, he transformed the entire landscape of Indian philosophical inquiry. After Gautama, every philosophical school, whether they agreed with Nyaya or not, had to grapple with its categories, its pramāṇas, its inferential framework. You couldn't just assert your metaphysical or theological positions anymore. You had to argue for them using rigorous logical methods. The Buddhist logicians Dignaga and Dharmakirti developed their sophisticated logical systems partly in direct response to Nyaya. They weren't just doing Buddhist philosophy. They were doing Buddhist philosophy in conversation with Nyaya, refining their positions through engagement with Nyaya critiques. The Mīmāmsa school, focused on Vedic ritual interpretation, adopted Nyaya's logical methods. The Vedanta school, concerned with metaphysics and theology, used Nyaya's epistemological framework. Even the heterodox schools like Jainism engaged seriously with Nyaya logic. Perhaps the most significant development was the merger of Nyaya with another orthodox school, Vaishesika. Vaishesika had developed a sophisticated atomic metaphysics and theory of categories. By the medieval period, these two schools had integrated so thoroughly that scholars speak of the Nyaya Vaishesika synthesis, one of the richest and most comprehensive philosophical systems in world philosophy. Then, in the 12th century, something remarkable happened: the rise of Navya Nyaya, new logic. This was a highly technical refinement of classical Nyaya that introduced a precise formal language to eliminate ambiguity in philosophical statements. The key figure was Gangesa Upadhyaya, whose 14th century text Tattvachintamani revolutionized Nyaya methodology. Navya Nyaya developed technical terminology and logical notation comparable in rigor to modern symbolic logic. It's one of the most sophisticated logical systems ever developed anywhere in the world. Navya Nyaya dominated Indian philosophy from the 14th century onward and continues to influence contemporary Indian epistemology. When Western scholars first encountered it in the 19th and 20th centuries, they were astonished by its sophistication.